The galaxy was a vast, glittering tapestry of wonders and horrors, and Captain Elias Grant had seen his fair share of both. Commanding the Stellar Blade, an agile human exploration vessel, Elias was not just a skilled fighter but a diplomat whose name was synonymous with ingenuity and bravery. However, even he could not have foreseen the life-altering encounter awaiting him at the desolate fringe of human-explored space. It began like any other mission, a trade reconnaissance trip to a remote space station known as Zephyrion's Eye, an infamous hub for intergalactic commerce. The station thrived in the shadowy gray area between legal trade and illicit dealings. Despite its reputation, it was a necessary stop for explorers and traders who sought rare artifacts, information, or resources unavailable through legitimate means. Elias's mission was straightforward: secure valuable alloys for Earth's fledgling colony on Kepler 452b. Docking the Stellar Blade in Zephyrion's bustling hangar, Elias and his crew were immediately enveloped by the cacophony of alien languages, the scent of exotic spices, and the ever-present undercurrent of danger. Elias, flanked by his loyal first officer, Lieutenant Harper Dune, made his way toward the central market. As they passed, curious eyes followed them. Humans were a rare sight this deep in space, and their presence always sparked intrigue, or trouble. Their transaction for the alloys was uneventful, and Elias was preparing to leave when a flicker of movement caught his eye. His gaze landed on a shadowy corridor leading away from the main thoroughfare. Something about it tugged at him, an instinct honed through years of navigating perilous situations. Against Harper's protests, Elias decided to investigate. The corridor opened into a dimly lit chamber that reeked of despair. There, in stark contrast to the lively market outside, was a scene of unspeakable cruelty. Rows of cages lined the walls, each holding beings from various species. Most were too weak to cry out, their eyes hollow and lifeless. A group of Xeric slavers stood nearby, bartering their merchandise with a shifty merchant. The Xerics were a reptilian race with a reputation for ruthlessness. Towering and sinewy, their scales shimmered ominously under the chamber's dim lights. Elias clenched his fists, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and disgust. Slavery had been outlawed in human territories for centuries, and witnessing it firsthand ignited a fire within him. As his eyes scanned the captives, he froze. In the corner of one cage, curled into a protective ball, was a figure unlike any he had seen before. Her skin was a delicate lavender, glowing faintly as if imbued with starlight. Silver eyes peered out from beneath tangled hair, wide with fear yet burning with a quiet defiance. She wore a metallic collar that emitted a faint hum, a suppressor designed to nullify psychic abilities, a technology the Xerics often used to subjugate powerful beings. Elias felt a surge of protectiveness. This girl, no older than her early 20s by human standards, did not belong here. None of them did. But something about her struck a deeper chord. Perhaps it was the way her gaze lingered on him, a silent plea laced with hope, or the way she pressed her frail body against the bars, as if sensing he might be different from the monsters who had caged her. "Captain, we should leave," Harper whispered urgently. "This is Xeric's territory. Picking a fight with them could compromise the mission." Elias's jaw tightened. "I'm not leaving her, or any of them, behind," he replied firmly. Harper sighed but didn't argue. She knew better than to challenge Elias once his mind was made up. Elias stepped forward, drawing the attention of the Xeric slavers. The largest among them, a scarred brute named Vackrel, sneered. "Human," he hissed, his forked tongue flicking. "This is no place for your kind. Leave before you regret it." Elias's voice was calm but laced with steel. "I'll take her. Name your price." Vackrel let out a guttural laugh. "She's not for sale. She's rare, Assyrian. Worth more than your entire species combined." The mention of her race stirred something in Elias. The Syrians were known for their extraordinary psychic abilities, but their peaceful nature had made them easy prey for the Xerics. Stories of their near extinction were whispered across the galaxy. This girl was likely one of the last of her kind. "Then I'll take all of them," Elias countered, gesturing to the cages. You'll find I have the means to make it worth your while. Vakrul's laughter subsided, replaced by suspicion. He studied Elias, calculating. And if I refuse? Elias smirked, his demeanor shifting. Then I suppose I'll have to take them by force. Before Vakrul could react, Elias moved. Years of combat training had honed his reflexes, and he was a blur of motion. In the chaos that followed, Harper and a small team of armed crew members joined the fray, their advanced weapons and tactics proving more than a match for the Xerix slavers. Elias reached the girl's cage, blasting the lock with a precision shot. As the door swung open, she hesitated, her eyes darting between him and the melee around them. You're safe now, Elias said gently, extending a hand. I promise. Her gaze lingered on his outstretched hand before she finally took it. Her touch was cold, her fingers trembling, but there was strength in her grip, a testament to her resilience. With the girl in his care, Elias led the other freed captives back to the stellar blade. The crew worked swiftly to secure their escape, evading Xerix's reinforcements with calculated precision. As the ship slipped into hyperspace, Elias finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. The girl sat silently in the medical bay, her knees drawn to her chest. Elias approached cautiously, his tone soft. I'm Elias. You're safe now. What's your name? She hesitated before answering, her voice barely above a whisper. Liara. Liara, he repeated, testing the name. It's beautiful. She looked up at him, her silver eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Why did you save me? Elias crouched beside her, meeting her gaze. Because no one deserves to be treated like that. And because I could. For the first time, a faint smile touched Liara's lips. It was fleeting, but it was enough to stir something deep within Elias, a determination to ensure her safety, no matter the cost. As the stellar blade sailed through the stars, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed forever. He didn't know what the future held for Liara or himself, but one thing was certain. Their journey together was only beginning. The stellar blade hummed softly as it sailed through the endless void of space, its course set toward humanity's nearest colony. Liara sat quietly in the observation deck, her lavender skin faintly glowing under the starlight streaming through the panoramic windows. She seemed fragile, yet there was an aura of strength about her, one that intrigued Captain Elias Grant. Elias watched her from a distance, his thoughts a jumble of questions. Who was this girl, truly? What had she endured before falling into the hands of the Xerix slavers? Most importantly, why did she stir such a fierce protectiveness within him? He approached her cautiously, his boots making soft thuds against the polished floor. Liara turned her head, sensing his presence before he spoke. Her silver eyes, though weary, met his with an intensity that caught him off guard. Can't sleep? He asked, keeping his tone gentle. She shook her head. I've never seen stars like this before. Not without bars between me and them. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of her experiences. Elias sat down beside her, careful to give her space. You'll see more of them now. No one will cage you again. Liara's gaze lingered on the stars for a moment longer before she spoke. You're different. Most people would have turned away, but you risked everything for me. Why? Elias paused, searching for the right words. I've seen too much suffering in my time. Too much injustice. If I have the power to stop it, I can't stand by and do nothing. She studied him, as if trying to gauge the sincerity of his words. Then, with a hesitant breath, she began to speak. Liara's painful past. I'm Syrian, she said softly, her voice trembling. Not that it means much anymore. There are so few of us left. Elias listened intently, his expression unreadable but his eyes filled with understanding. My people were peaceful. We didn't fight. We didn't even know how to. We lived in harmony with the universe, using our abilities to heal, to nurture, to create. But that made us vulnerable. The Xerix saw our powers as tools to exploit, and when we refused to serve them, they destroyed everything. Our cities, our families, they left nothing but ashes. Her hands trembled as she spoke, and Elias resisted the urge to reach out and steady them. She wasn't done. They captured those of us who survived and used these. She touched the faintly glowing collar around her neck, a device that had been deactivated but still clung to her like a cruel reminder. The suppressor. It blocks our abilities, makes us weak, compliant. Without it, I could have fought back. I could have. Her voice cracked, and she looked away. You survived, Elias said quietly. That takes more strength than you realize. Liara shook her head, tears welling in her silver eyes. Surviving isn't the same as living. I've spent years in cages, dreaming of a freedom I thought I'd never have. Until you. Her words hung in the air, and Elias felt a lump in his throat. He had seen many horrors in his time, but Liara's story struck a chord deeper than any he had known. She wasn't just a victim, she was a symbol of everything humanity fought against in its quest for justice and unity. Revealing the threat. As Liara continued to recover, her suppressed psychic abilities began to resurface, albeit slowly. One night she woke from a restless sleep, her body drenched in sweat and her breathing labored. Elias found her pacing the medical bay, her eyes wide with fear. What's wrong? He asked, concern etched into his features. I saw them, she said, her voice shaking. The Xerics. They're planning something terrible. Elias frowned. You're sure? Liara nodded. It wasn't a dream. It was a vision. My people could see glimpses of the future, fragments of what might be. The Xerics are gathering their forces. They're planning an attack on one of your colonies. Elias's stomach sank. Which colony? I don't know, Liara admitted, frustration lacing her voice. The vision wasn't clear, but it's soon. You have to warn them. Elias didn't doubt her. The intensity in her voice, the fear in her eyes, it was all too real. He immediately ordered his crew to chart a course for the nearest colony, ensuring they stayed on high alert. A growing connection. In the days that followed, Elias and Liara spent more time together, their bond deepening with each passing moment. He taught her about human customs and culture, sharing stories of Earth's history and his own adventures as a starship captain. Liara, in turn, shared tales of her people's once thriving civilization, painting vivid pictures of its beauty and harmony. One evening, as they sat in the ship's lounge, Liara surprised Elias by laughing at one of his jokes. The sound was soft, almost hesitant, but it was the first genuine moment of joy he had seen from her. You have a beautiful laugh, he said, his voice warm. Liara blushed, her lavender skin darkening slightly. I didn't think I'd ever have a reason to laugh again. Elias smiled. You'll have plenty of reasons now. I promise. She looked at him, her expression serious. You've already done so much for me, Elias. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You don't have to, he replied. Just knowing you're safe is enough. But even as they shared these moments, tensions brewed among the crew. Not everyone was as accepting of Liara as Elias was. Some viewed her as a liability, a potential threat given her psychic abilities and the danger she had brought upon them. One crew member, a seasoned engineer named Greaves, voiced his concerns openly. Captain, with all due respect, we don't know what she's capable of. She could turn on us, or worse, lead the Xerics right to us. Elias's response was firm. Liara is under my protection. If anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me. Greaves backed down, but the tension remained, a subtle undercurrent that Elias couldn't ignore. The Xerics strike back. The threat became tangible when the stellar blade was ambushed by a Xeric scout ship. Alarms blared as the enemy vessel closed in, its weapons charging for an attack. Elias sprang into action, his sharp commands rallying the crew to defend the ship. Liara, watching from the sidelines, felt a surge of helplessness. She wanted to fight, to prove she wasn't just a burden, but the suppressor collar still inhibited her abilities. The battle was fierce, but the stellar blade held its own, outmaneuvering the Xeric's ship with precision. Elias's strategic brilliance shone as he exploited the enemy's weaknesses, forcing them to retreat. In the aftermath, Liara approached him, determination in her eyes. "I want to help," she said. "I can't just sit by while you risk everything for me." Elias hesitated. "Your safety is my priority." "And what about yours?" she countered. "You said I was strong, but how can I prove it if you won't let me try?" Her words struck a chord, and Elias realized she was right. She wasn't a victim anymore, she was a survivor, and she deserved the chance to fight for her freedom. Preparing for the unknown. As they neared the colony, Liara worked with the ship's engineers to study the suppressor collar. Though they couldn't remove it completely, they managed to weaken its effects, allowing her to access a fraction of her abilities. For the first time, Liara felt a spark of hope. She wasn't fully free yet, but she was on the path to reclaiming her power. Elias watched her with a mixture of pride and concern. She was transforming before his eyes, shedding the chains of her past and stepping into her own strength. But he knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger, for both of them. As the stellar blade approached the colony, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that their journey together was just beginning, and that Liara's secrets would be key to humanity's survival. The stellar blade exited hyperspace just as the colony of Arinder IV came into view. The planet hung against the backdrop of a dark starfield, its surface shimmering with the artificial glow of bustling human cities. Yet something felt off. As Elias stared at the planet through the bridge's viewport, he noticed an unusual density of ships near the colony, more than the routine traffic of cargo freighters and transport vessels. His instincts, honed through years of navigating dangerous situations, screamed a warning. "Lieutenant Harper," Elias said, his voice steady but tense. "Scan the area for any unusual activity. I don't like what I'm seeing." Harper's fingers danced across her console as she activated the ship's sensors. A moment later, her face paled. "Captain, we've got multiple unidentified vessels in orbit, and their energy signatures match Zarek's warships." The bridge fell silent, the crew processing the weight of her words. A Zarek's fleet this close to a human colony was an act of war. Elias clenched his jaw, his mind racing to formulate a plan. The vision Liara had shared was no longer a mere warning, it was happening now. Rallying the colony. "Open a channel to the colony," Elias ordered, his voice cutting through the tension. "We need to warn them." The image of Governor Marlowe, the colony's leader, flickered onto the main screen. He was an older man, his face lined with the stress of leadership in such a remote and vulnerable outpost. "Captain Grant," Marlowe greeted, his tone wary. "What brings you to Arinder IV?" "Governor, there's no time for formalities," Elias replied. "The Zareks are here, and they're preparing to attack. You need to mobilize your defenses immediately." Marlowe's expression hardened. "We've detected their ships, but we assumed it was a minor incursion." "Are you certain it's an invasion?" "Absolutely," Elias said firmly. "They won't stop at a show of force. They mean to take this colony, and they won't leave survivors." Marlowe hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "We'll activate our defense grid and alert the militia. Captain, any assistance you can provide would be invaluable." Elias ended the transmission and turned to his crew. "This is it, people. We're not just protecting ourselves anymore, we're defending every man, woman, and child on that planet. Harper, coordinate with the colony's defense team. Greaves, get our weapons systems fully operational. And someone get Liara to the briefing room. I have a feeling we'll need her insight." Uniting allies and forming a strategy. In the briefing room, Elias laid out a holographic map of the battlefield. Liara stood nearby, her posture tense but resolute. The rest of the senior crew gathered around, their faces a mix of determination and apprehension. "The Zareks outnumber us," Elias began, pointing to the cluster of enemy ships surrounding the planet. "Their fleet is designed for intimidation and brute force. But that doesn't mean they're invincible. If we can disrupt their formation, we might buy enough time for the colony's defenses to repel the invasion." Liara stepped forward, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "The Zareks have a weakness. They rely on centralized command ships to coordinate their forces. If you take out the command vessel, the rest of the fleet will be disorganized and vulnerable." Elias nodded. That's where we come in. The Stellar Blade has the speed and firepower to breach their lines and target the command ship. Meanwhile, the colony's militia will focus on defending the ground installations. Harper frowned. It's risky, Captain. If we fail to take out the command ship, we'll be surrounded with no escape. Then we don't fail, Elias said firmly. This is humanity's chance to show the galaxy what we're made of. We fight with everything we've got. The battle begins. As the Xerix fleet advanced, the skies above Arinder 4 became a storm of energy blasts and explosions. The Stellar Blade darted through the chaos, its sleek design allowing it to outmaneuver the larger, lumbering Xerix warships. Harper's voice rang out over the comms, coordinating the crew's efforts with precision. Shields holding at 75%, she reported. Enemy fighters closing in on our position. Greaves, give them something to think about, Elias ordered. The ship's weapons roared to life, streaks of plasma fire cutting through the void and striking the enemy fighters. Several exploded in brilliant bursts of light, while the rest scattered, momentarily breaking their pursuit. Liara watched the battle from the tactical station, her hands gripping the edge of the console. Though her psychic abilities were still limited by the suppressor collar, she felt a surge of clarity, a vision forming in her mind. She closed her eyes, focusing on the images flashing before her. Elias, she said suddenly, her voice urgent. The command ship is hiding behind the third moon. They're using it as cover to coordinate the attack. Elias didn't hesitate. Harper, adjust our course. Take us around the moon. If Liara's right, we'll hit them where it hurts. The Stellar Blade veered sharply, its engines roaring as it accelerated toward the moon. As they rounded the celestial body, the Xerix command ship came into view, a massive, menacing vessel bristling with weaponry. There it is, Elias said, his jaws set. All hands, prepare for an assault. This ends now. Liara's awakening. As the Stellar Blade engaged the command ship, it became clear that the Xerix were prepared for resistance. Their defensive fire was relentless, forcing Elias and his crew to push their skills and technology to the limit. The ship shook violently under the strain, alarms blaring as systems were pushed to their breaking points. Liara watched in horror as the battle unfolded. The crew's bravery inspired her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. They were fighting with everything they had, but the Xerix were relentless. Something more was needed. And then it happened. A surge of energy coursed through her body, radiating from deep within. The suppressor collar sparked and cracked, its grip over her abilities faltering. Liara gasped as her psychic powers flooded back, stronger and more focused than ever. She turned to Elias, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. I can help, she said, her voice steady but intense. I can stop them. Elias hesitated, concern flashing in his eyes. Liara, are you sure? Using your powers like this, it could kill you. I don't care, she said fiercely. You've risked everything for me. Now it's my turn. Turning the tide. With Elias's reluctant approval, Liara stepped into the heart of the battle. Concentrating with all her might, she unleashed a psychic wave that rippled through the enemy fleet. Xerix pilots clutched their heads in agony, their ships spiraling out of control. The command ship's systems faltered, its weapons falling silent as Liara's powers disrupted its coordination network. Now's our chance! Elias shouted. Target the command ship and fire everything we've got! The Stellar Blade unleashed a barrage of firepower, striking the weakened command vessel. Explosions rippled across its surface, and moments later, the massive ship disintegrated in a blinding flash. With their command ship destroyed, the remaining Xerix vessels broke formation, retreating into the void. Cheers erupted across the Stellar Blade as the crew realized they had won. The aftermath. Liara collapsed, her strength spent. Elias caught her before she hit the floor, cradling her in his arms. You did it, he said softly. You saved us. She managed a faint smile. You saved me first. The colony of Arinder 4 was safe, and humanity had sent a clear message to the galaxy. They would not bow to tyranny. As Elias and his crew returned to the planet, they were hailed as heroes. But for Elias, the real victory was seeing Liara finally free, not just from her physical chains, but from the fear that had held her captive for so long. The battle was over, but Elias knew their journey was far from finished. Together, he and Liara would face whatever challenges lay ahead, united by the bond they had forged in the crucible of war. The air on the stellar blade was lighter now, but only slightly. The Xerix fleet's retreat was a victory celebrated across the colony of Verinderfor, yet the scars of battle were fresh. Debris still floated in orbit, a grim reminder of the lives lost and the price paid for freedom. The colony's defense systems were battered, and many of its people were shaken. But they were alive, and they had hope, and much of that hope rested on the actions of Captain Elias Grant and the alien girl he had rescued. In the quiet aftermath, the bond between Elias and Liara began to deepen in ways neither of them had expected. It started with small, tender moments, Liara joining Elias on the observation deck as he watched the stars, her voice steady and soft as she asked questions about Earth, its people, and its customs. She was no longer the trembling, fearful figure Elias had first seen in that cage. She was finding herself again, though the path was not without its struggles. Liara's transformation. Liara's psychic abilities were a constant undercurrent in her life now, no longer held back by the Xerix suppressor collar. The suppressor had been permanently removed after the battle, thanks to the colony's advanced technology and a human engineer's ingenuity. She was free to use her powers fully, but with that freedom came responsibility and fear. One evening, Elias found her in the ship's training room, her lavender skin glistening with sweat as she practiced focusing her abilities. Objects floated in the air around her, trembling slightly as she tried to control them. Her frustration was evident. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Elias said, leaning against the doorway. Liara glanced at him but didn't stop. "I have to. If I'd been stronger, fewer people would have died." "That's not on you," Elias said firmly, stepping into the room. "You did more than anyone could have asked. You saved the colony, Liara." She let the objects drop, turning to face him. Her silver eyes shone with emotion. "And what if it's not enough next time? What if I fail again?" Elias moved closer, his expression softening. "You didn't fail. You can't carry the weight of every loss. All you can do is your best, and your best is more than enough." His words seemed to reach her, and for a moment they simply stood there, the silence between them filled with an unspoken understanding. Elias's inner conflict. While Liara grappled with her powers and newfound freedom, Elias was dealing with his own turmoil. The battle had brought his feelings for her to the surface, feelings he wasn't sure how to navigate. He admired her strength, her resilience, and the quiet grace with which she faced her past. But as her protector and a starship captain, he feared crossing a line he couldn't uncross. Late one night, as he reviewed the Stellar Blade's reports in his quarters, his thoughts drifted to her. She had changed so much since he'd first seen her in that cage. She was no longer a victim, she was a survivor, a fighter, and someone he deeply respected. But respect was only part of what he felt. A soft knock on his door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he said. The door slid open, and Liara stepped inside, her movements hesitant. "I didn't mean to disturb you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not disturbing me," Elias replied, gesturing for her to sit. "What's on your mind?" She sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I wanted to thank you. For everything. You've done so much for me, and I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't owe me anything," Elias said, his tone gentle. "What I did, I'd do for anyone." Liara looked down, her expression unreadable. "But it wasn't just anyone. It was me. And you've shown me more kindness than I ever thought I deserved." Elias leaned forward, his voice softening. "Liara, you deserve kindness. You deserve freedom, respect, and a chance to build the life you want. Don't ever think otherwise." Her silver eyes met his, and for a moment, the air between them seemed to shift. There was something unspoken in her gaze, something that mirrored the feelings Elias had been struggling to suppress. But before either of them could say anything more, Liara stood. "Good night, Elias," she said softly, and before he could respond, she was gone. A new threat and a defiant choice. Their quiet moments were soon interrupted by an unexpected message from Earth Command. A high-ranking official, Admiral Carson, ordered Elias to bring Liara back to Earth immediately. Her psychic abilities, Carson argued, were a valuable asset that could turn the tide in humanity's conflicts. The tone of the order left no room for negotiation. Elias's jaw tightened as he ended the transmission. He had known this day might come, but he wasn't prepared for the anger that surged through him. Liara wasn't a weapon or a tool to be used. She was a person, and he had promised to protect her. When he told Liara about the order, her reaction was quiet but heartbreaking. "They want to study me," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Use me like the Xerics did." Elias reached for her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "I won't let that happen." She looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "You'd defy Earth Command? Risk everything for me?" "I would," Elias said without hesitation. "You've been through enough. I won't let them take away your freedom." A declaration of love. Elias's decision put him at odds with Earth Command, but he didn't care. He had made a promise to Liara, and he intended to keep it. Together, they plotted a new course, one that would take them far from the reach of Earth's military. On the final night before their departure, Elias found Liara on the observation deck, staring out at the stars. She turned as he approached, her expression soft but uncertain. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything." "You don't have to thank me," Elias replied. "I'm just doing what's right." She stepped closer, her voice trembling slightly. "It's more than that, isn't it?" Elias hesitated, his heart pounding. "Liara, I see it in your eyes," she continued, her silver gaze locking onto his. "The way you look at me. I feel it every time you're near. You care about me, don't you?" He couldn't deny it any longer. "I do," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "More than I should." Her hand reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his skin. "Why do you think it's wrong?" "Because you've been through so much," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't want to add to your burden." "You're not a burden," she said firmly. "You're the reason I'm still standing." Before he could respond, she leaned in, her lips brushing against his in a kiss that was both tender and filled with unspoken emotions. It was a moment that erased all doubt, a connection that transcended words. A new beginning. The next morning, the stellar blade slipped into hyperspace, its course set for uncharted territory. Elias and Liara stood together on the bridge, their hands brushing but not quite touching. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew they would face it together. Liara's psychic abilities continued to evolve, and she began to embrace them as a gift rather than a curse. With Elias by her side, she felt stronger, more confident, and ready to carve out a new life among the stars. As the ship sailed into the unknown, Elias glanced at Liara and smiled. "Ready for the next adventure?" She returned his smile, her silver eyes shimmering with hope. "As long as you're with me." Unbreakable bond they had forged in the crucible of war.